They laughed when she stopped to help the old woman everyone else had ignored. The manager's voice exploded across the restaurant.
Get back to work and get that beggar out of here.
Customers turned in their seats. Phones came up. A few people laughed as the elderly woman in the torn gray coat sat trembling beside the entrance, too weak to defend herself. Amaka froze. She knew exactly what would happen if she disobeyed. Her manager had already warned her once. But then she looked at the woman's shaking hands. Without saying another word, Amaka took off her apron, knelt beside her, and carefully wiped the spilled soup from the floor. Please, the manager snapped.
This is your last warning.
Amaka looked up. She's cold, she said quietly.
Then you can sit outside with her. You're fired!
The restaurant went silent. Amaka had just risked her only source of income for a woman everyone had treated like she was worthless. What nobody in that restaurant knew was that the trembling old woman wasn't a helpless beggar at all.
She's cold. She just needs somewhere safe to sit. Hey, my child. You're welcome.
She was a billionaire. And in just 3 days, she would own the very building that restaurant stood in.
Amaka Chukwu was 24 years old and had worked at Palm Court Restaurant on Victoria Island for almost 2 years. She lived in a single room in a rented compound near Aja, where the ceiling leaked every rainy season and the landlord raised the rent every January. Her mother back in Enugu called every Sunday to ask if she was eating enough. Amaka always said yes, even on the weeks she wasn't. She had learned early that dignity cost nothing, even when everything else did. That Tuesday afternoon had started like any other. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, bankers in tailored suits, a table of oil executives arguing over contracts, a young couple celebrating an engagement near the window. Amaka moved between tables with practiced calm, balancing trays, remembering names, absorbing the quiet impatience of people who had never once had to wait for anything in their lives. Then the old woman walked in. She wore a coat that had clearly once been expensive, but was now faded and frayed at the cuffs. Her shoes did not match. Her hair was uncombed, pushed back with trembling fingers. She stood near the door for almost a full minute before anyone acknowledged her. And when the host finally looked up, his face folded into something close to disgust. "We don't have space," he said, though 4 tables sat empty behind him. The old woman didn't argue. She simply lowered herself onto the bench near the entrance, the way someone does when their legs have already made the decision for them. Amaka noticed the way her hands shook. She noticed the gray color beneath her eyes, the way her breathing came shallow and quick. She had seen that look before, on her own grandmother, the year before she died. She filled a glass of water without being asked and walked over. "Ma, are you all right?" The old woman looked up, startled that anyone had spoken to her gently. "I just need a moment," she whispered. "My sugar, it drops sometimes." Amaka didn't think. She went to the kitchen, took a small bowl of the vegetable soup meant for a canceled order, and brought it back with a spoon. That was when her manager saw her. "What is this?" he shouted, loud enough that every table turned. "You are giving away restaurant food to a beggar? Get her out of here before she scares the customers." "She's not feeling well," Amaka said quietly. "I don't care. This is not a charity house." The old woman tried to stand, apologizing, her voice thin with embarrassment. She reached for the door, and in her hurry, the soup bowl tipped and spilled across the marble floor. A ripple of laughter came from a nearby table, young men in expensive shirts, amused by the scene as though it had been arranged for their entertainment. Amaka knelt down immediately, not to clean the mess for her manager's sake, but because the old woman's eyes had filled with tears, and no one deserved to be laughed at for being poor and unwell. "It's all right," Amaka told her, low enough that only she could hear. "Nobody in here matters more than you do." Her manager's voice cracked through the room again. "Chukwu, outside, now, and don't bother coming back for your shift tomorrow." Amaka's chest tightened, but she didn't look away from the old woman's face. She helped her stand, walked her out through the glass doors, and sat with her on the curb until a taxi could be called. A taxi Amaka paid for with money she didn't have to spare. "What's your name?" the old woman asked. once she was steady enough to speak. Amaka. Thank you, Amaka. The old woman studied her for a long moment, as though memorizing her face. You didn't have to lose your job for me. You didn't have to be treated like that, Amaka said simply. The taxi pulled away. Amaka stood on the pavement, unemployed, with rent due in 9 days and 11,000 naira in her account. She never asked the old woman's name. By Thursday, Amaka had applied to 6 restaurants and been turned away from 5. The 6th manager told her he'd call, the way people say things they don't mean. She sold her only pair of good shoes to a second-hand dealer near the market to cover part of the week's rent, telling her landlord the rest would come soon, though she didn't know from where. Her roommate, Ifeoma, offered what she could, but Ifeoma was a hairdresser with her own bills, and pride kept Amaka from taking more than she needed. On Friday evening, a black SUV parked outside the compound gate. The neighborhood children noticed first, gathering around the vehicle the way children gather around anything unfamiliar and expensive. A driver stepped out, followed by a woman in a tailored suit who asked, with careful formality, whether a Miss Amaka Chukwu lived at this address. Amaka's landlord answered before she could, already imagining trouble. What has she done? Nothing, the woman said. She's needed for a meeting. Amaka came to the door, wiping her hands on a cloth, confusion written across her face. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Adeyemi, personal assistant to Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo-Balogun. The name meant nothing to Amaka. Who is that? She asked. Mrs. Adeyemi's expression flickered with something like disbelief, quickly hidden. You helped her on Tuesday, at Palm Court. Amaka's mind went back to the old woman with the trembling hands and the torn coat. The woman who wasn't feeling well? She would like to see you. Tomorrow morning, if you're available. Amaka almost laughed. Available, as though she had somewhere else to be. That night, she barely slept. Ifeoma sat across from her on the thin mattress, turning her phone screen toward the light. She had searched the name. Amaka, Ifeoma said slowly. Come and see this. The search results filled the screen. A woman in her 70s, photographed at ribbon cuttings, hospital openings, university donations. Ngozi Okonjo-Balogun, chairwoman of Balogun Holdings. Real estate, shipping, agriculture, 3 private hospitals across Lagos and Abuja. One of the wealthiest women in Nigeria. Amaka stared at the photograph, the same tired eyes, the same soft mouth, though in the picture she wore silk instead of a torn gray coat. That can't be her, Amaka whispered. She was alone. Nobody was helping her. Maybe that's exactly why she needed you, Ifeoma said. Amaka didn't sleep that night. She kept thinking of the soup spilled across the marble floor, the laughter from the young men in their expensive shirts, her manager's voice cracking through the restaurant like a whip. She kept thinking that if she had known, she might have been too nervous to act at all, and she was glad, somehow, that she hadn't known. Kindness given freely was worth more than kindness given carefully. The next morning, the black SUV returned. The gates of the Balogun estate on Banana Island opened slowly, revealing a compound larger than Amaka's entire neighborhood back home. Palm trees lined a driveway of pale stone. A fountain turned quietly near the entrance, catching the morning light. Amaka stepped out of the car with her heart lodged somewhere near her throat, painfully aware of her worn sandals against the polished ground. A butler led her through a hallway lined with family photographs, weddings, graduations, a young Ngozi standing beside a man in military uniform, a boy in school uniform holding a certificate. Amaka noticed there were no recent photographs of children, only the older ones, fading slightly with age. She was shown into a sitting room where Ngozi waited, seated near a window, dressed simply this time in a plain blue wrapper, her hair neatly covered with a scarf. She looked, for a moment, exactly as she had on the restaurant floor, fragile, tired, and entirely without pretense. Sit, my dear, Ngozi said, gesturing to the chair across from her. You look like you haven't slept. Neither have you, Ma, Amaka said, before she could stop herself. Ngozi laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. No, I suppose I haven't. A tray of tea sat between them, untouched. Ngozi studied Amaka for a long moment before speaking again. Do you know why I was sitting outside that restaurant looking the way I did? Amaka shook her head. I do that sometimes, Ngozi said. I dress plainly. I go into places without my driver, without my assistants, and I watch how people treat someone who appears to have nothing. It tells me more about a business and about people than any report my accountants could give me. So it was a test, Amaka said quietly, something cooling in her chest. It began as one, Ngozi admitted. But my sugar truly did drop that day. The dizziness was real. The fear was real. For those few minutes, I wasn't testing anyone. I was simply an old woman who needed help, and nobody was willing to give it. Except you. Amaka said nothing. Outside, the fountain continued its quiet turning. I have interviewed 40 people this year for a position I have struggled to fill, Ngozi continued. Not a job posted in newspapers. A position inside my own family's foundation, working directly with me. I need someone who treats people the same whether they are wearing silk or rags. Someone who cannot be taught kindness, because they already have it. Ma, I lost my job for what I did, Amaka said. I'm not looking for. I know exactly what it cost you. Ngozi interrupted gently. That is precisely why I'm offering you this. Amaka's hands tightened in her lap. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Another part, the part that had survived on nothing for years, was already searching for the trap. Why me? She asked. There must be people more qualified. People with degrees, connections. I have those people, Ngozi said. What I don't have is someone who would kneel on a dirty floor for a stranger, knowing it would cost her everything. Before Amaka could answer, the door opened, and a man walked in without knocking. Tall, sharply dressed, his expression already tightening at the sight of her. Mother, he said, his voice carefully polite and entirely cold. I didn't realize we were receiving visitors. Ngozi's posture changed, ever so slightly. Emeka, this is Amaka. She'll be joining the foundation. Something passed behind the man's eyes, quick, calculating, gone before Amaka could name it. Will she? He said. How interesting. Amaka accepted the position within the week. The foundation offices occupied the top floor of a glass building overlooking the lagoon, nothing like the cramped restaurant kitchen she'd left behind. She was given a small apartment closer to the office, a modest salary that felt enormous against her old one, and a title she still wasn't entirely sure she understood, special assistant to the chairwoman. But the warmth she'd found in Ngozi's sitting room did not extend to the rest of the building. Emeka made his opposition clear from the first week, questioning her presence in meetings, redirecting tasks around her, speaking over her whenever she offered an idea. The other executives, sensing where power truly lived, followed his lead. Amaka ate lunch alone most days, aware of the whispers that followed her through the hallways. The girl from the restaurant, they called her, as though her past were a stain rather than a beginning. She said nothing. She worked harder. It was in her third week that she found the discrepancy, a set of invoices for a rural hospital project that didn't match the actual construction reports. Numbers that didn't add up. Payments made to a contractor that, as far as she could find, didn't exist. She brought it to Ngozi quietly, without accusation, simply laying the documents on the desk. Ngozi's face changed as she read them. Not shock, Amaka realized, but something closer to confirmation of a fear she had been carrying for a long time. Does anyone else know you found this? Ngozi asked. No, Ma. Keep it that way. For now. That evening, as Amaka packed her things to leave the office, Emeka appeared in the doorway of her small workspace. His usual composure cracked at the edges. You should understand something, he said. My mother is not well. Her memory slips more than she admits. The board has been managing certain adjustments for her own good. Adjustments, Amaka repeated. You wouldn't understand the pressures of running a company this size. I understand theft when I see it, Amaka said, keeping her voice steady though her pulse hammered in her ears. Emeka's jaw tightened. Be careful, Amaka. People who involve themselves in matters above their understanding tend to find themselves back where they started. Poor, unemployed, forgotten. He left without another word. 2 days later, Amaka arrived at the office to find her access badge deactivated. Security informed her, with visible discomfort, that her position had been terminated, effective immediately, by order of the acting director. She stood in the lobby of the glass building, the same disbelief rising in her chest that she'd felt outside Palm Court weeks earlier. She called Ngozi's private line. It rang without answer. For 3 days, she heard nothing. On the 4th day, a car she didn't recognize stopped outside her apartment. Mrs. Adeyemi stepped out, her face pale, her voice tight with urgency. "Mrs. Ballaghan is in the hospital," she said. "She's asking for you. Only you." The private hospital wing was quiet except for the soft rhythm of a heart monitor. Ngozi lay against pillows that seemed too large for her, an oxygen tube resting beneath her nose, her hands thin and pale against the white sheets. But her eyes, when they found Amaka, were sharp and clear. "They told me you'd been let go," Ngozi said, her voice weaker than before but steady. "Emeka's doing, I assume." "Yes, Ma. He's been moving money out of the foundation for almost 2 years," Ngozi said. "I suspected. I didn't have proof. Not until you found it. Ma, you should rest." "I don't have time to rest, Amaka." Ngozi's hand found hers, gripping with surprising strength. "My doctors tell me my heart is failing faster than we hoped. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it quickly." She explained everything, the documents locked in her private safe, the lawyer who had drafted changes to the foundation's leadership months earlier, changes Ngozi had been too afraid to finalize, afraid of what it would mean for her only son. "I built this foundation to help people like the family I came from," Ngozi said, "not to enrich people who forgot where they came from. I want you to lead it. Not because you knelt beside me on a restaurant floor. Because in 3 weeks, you have shown me more integrity than my own son has shown in 30 years. Ma, I can't. You already are," Ngozi said. "You simply haven't accepted it yet." The following days moved quickly. Lawyers arrived. Documents were signed. Emeka, informed of the accusations against him, arrived at the hospital with fury barely contained beneath a composed exterior, but the evidence Amaka had found, corroborated now by forensic accountants, left him little room to maneuver. The board, shown the truth, voted unanimously to remove him from any position of financial authority within the company. He stood in the hospital hallway afterward, staring at Amaka with something between hatred and disbelief. "You think this makes you family," he said quietly. "You're still the girl who spilled soup on a restaurant floor." "I never wanted to be anything else," Amaka answered. "I only wanted her to be treated with respect. Everything after that was her choice, not mine." Emeka left without another word and did not return. Ngozi's health stabilized over the following weeks, though her doctors were careful with their optimism. Amaka visited her every evening after work, no longer as an employee reporting to a chairwoman, but as something closer to family, the kind built not from blood, but from a single act of kindness that neither of them had expected to matter. 6 months later, the foundation announced a new initiative, scholarships and small business grants for women working in hospitality, cleaning, and domestic service across Lagos. Ngozi stood at the podium during the announcement, leaning slightly on a cane, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "This program exists because a young woman once knelt on a dirty floor to help someone she owed nothing to," Ngozi said. "She lost her job that day. She gained something far greater. I hope every woman who receives this grant remembers that kindness costs something, and it is worth paying." Amaka stood near the back of the room, no longer in a borrowed uniform, no longer invisible. Somewhere in Enugu, her mother was watching the broadcast on a neighbor's television, crying quietly with pride she had no words for. Outside the building, rain began to fall, soft, unhurried, the kind that Lagos rarely offered gently. Amaka closed her eyes and let it. She had lost a job for helping a stranger. She had gained a purpose she never could have asked for. And somewhere, she knew, the old woman in the torn gray coat was smiling.